So I think that the breakout is a good signal, right? So we've been consolidating in price since March of this year. I think the launch of the ETFs kind of pulled forward some demand. So you had a little
Hmm.
bit, overly high sentiment. People kind of bid it to the moon, and it takes time to kind of digest that change. And we kind of went through that. I think we would have eventually broken out either way, regardless of how the election turned out. But obviously, there's even though there are Republicans and Democrats that are on both sides of the issue, and right now in American politics, the Republican side is generally more favorable toward Bitcoin
Hmm.
than the Democratic side. There's talks about a strategic reserve.
Hmm.
Explicit statements that people should be able to custody their own coins, or and maybe even have it like not be taxed. And
As Bitcoin's price climbs, financial analyst Lyn Alden explores the forces propelling this surge and its potential to keep going. In a conversation with Natalie Brunell, Alden highlights how ETFs and shifting political tides are impacting Bitcoin's outlook. She points to growing resistance to decentralized assets, particularly in heavily regulated areas like Europe. This regulatory pushback, she notes, reflects a deep-seated tension between traditional financial systems and the rise of decentralized technologies, with both advocates and critics agreeing that this friction exposes weaknesses in legacy financial models, especially under economic stress. Alden also turns her focus to the U.S. fiscal landscape, pointing out potential risks tied to large ongoing deficits. Though she downplays the chance of immediate hyperinflation, Alden warns of a gradual emerging marketification of the American economy, where structural deficits could destabilize economic foundations. She believes this shift could fuel growing populist feelings and increasing public frustration, highlighting the deep connection between economic policies, financial stability, and social unrest. To hear more insights from Lyn Alden, watch clips from the interview. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for additional in-depth content. Thanks for joining us again. Enjoy the video.
So I think that the breakout is a good signal, right? So we've been consolidating in price since March of this year. I think the launch of the ETFs kind of pulled forward some demand. So you had a little
Hmm.
bit, overly high sentiment. People kind of bid it to the moon, and it takes time to kind of digest that change. And we kind of went through that. I think we would have eventually broken out either way, regardless of how the election turned out. But obviously, there's even though there are Republicans and Democrats that are on both sides of the issue, and right now in American politics, the Republican side is generally more favorable toward Bitcoin
Hmm.
than the Democratic side. There's talks about a strategic reserve.
Hmm.
Explicit statements that people should be able to custody their own coins, or and maybe even have it like not be taxed. And so I
Yeah.
generally take the under on major changes. So like, would I guess in 4 years from now, do we have a gigantic Bitcoin reserve, or is Bitcoin tax free? That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I wouldn't really base my investment decision on that being the case. Um, but in general, I'm not making a statement around politics, but basically in terms of this specific industry, that was generally seen by the market as the more favorable choice.
Hmm.
Um, I think that where I'm also more conservative is around privacy.
Mm.
So I think that while this election had major impacts on, for example, the SEC and broader crypto securities in general,
Hmm.
and then maybe things like Bitcoin strategic reserve and stuff, I doubt it's going to be super impactful for these problematic laws around privacy, or in some
Yeah.
cases, not even laws, but just like regulations by entities, how they interpret the law. And for example, even going after like non-custodial privacy services and things like that. And so we talked about risks earlier in this. I still think one of the biggest risks of the network is kind of this anti-privacy push
Yeah.
that the United States government and others have. And that's pretty challenging to change in the near term. I think that's going to be a longer battle. And I think even public opinion is kind of on their side at the moment, because people still have this mindset that, like, why do you need privacy? It must mean you're up to no good, or kind of Bitcoin's only used by like money launderers and druggies, and it's kind of still the mindset that a lot of people have, and that's why I think that education is so important, and the work you're doing to keep educating about it. Um, in general, I'm pretty bullish for 2025. I think that um, liquidity is probably going to be pretty good over the next 12 months. And I generally expect Bitcoin to probably be higher 12 months from now than it
Mhm.
is now. Obviously, no guarantees, but that's kind of my base case at the current time. And I think that
Mhm.
one of my kind of macro views on the election is that nothing stops this train, which
Yeah.
is to say that there are people that are pretty convinced we're going to see a big budget reduction or something like that, and I don't really see that as likely. When we look at major areas of government spending, it's mostly actually not on kind of certain bloated government employee areas. It's actually these really big core areas, things like
Mm.
Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, defense, and interest.
Yeah.
And that kind of alone is like 100% of tax receipts.
Wow.
Um, and one of the things I found interesting is that you've had somewhat of a shift in the Republican Party over the past decade, which is that if you go back a decade, that was kind of the Paul Ryan era, which was kind of a more push toward trimming some of those areas.
Mhm.
Whereas, for example, the 2024 Republican platform officially said we don't want to touch Medicare or Social Security. We don't want to reduce it or increase the retirement age, which used to be more of a Democrat position. And so, if there are certain aspects where the current Republican Party has shifted a little bit more toward like what we see in like European conservative movements, which is that they might be a little more social conservative than there are other parties there, but they're not necessarily super fiscally conservative. There's
Mhm.
there's different parts in that kind of political spectrum that politicians and voters can fall on, and so I generally assume that deficits are probably going to continue, but I'm going to monitor bills and legislation as they come up and see how this goes.
Lyn Alden views the recent breakout in Bitcoin's price as a positive signal following months of consolidation. She attributes heightened demand partly to the launch of exchange-traded funds, ETFs, noting that market sentiment needed time to stabilize. While believing a price breakout was inevitable, she acknowledges the Republican Party's comparatively favorable stance toward Bitcoin could influence sentiment. She emphasizes privacy as a major concern, pointing to regulatory actions against non-custodial privacy services. Alden predicts strong liquidity for Bitcoin in 2025, foreseeing possible price increases. She also highlights ongoing U.S. fiscal deficits and evolving political positions on social spending. Lyn Alden notes Europe's prominent pushback against Bitcoin, framing it as the "then they fight you" stage. She suggests that resistance to decentralized systems often reveals weaknesses in traditional structures. Here are more clips from the interview.
I do think we're seeing it in Europe to some extent, probably at the most right now, which is that you have pushback against Bitcoin. They're
Mhm.
kind of in the then
Yeah.
they fight you stage.
Yeah.
Um, and the way that I phrased it before is if a decentralized spreadsheet threatens your system, it's not the decentralized spreadsheet that's the problem, it's your system. But
Right.
that's not how a lot of people see it when their own paychecks and their own economies having a problem.
Mhm.
Um, Going back to the earlier idea of either a deflationary bust or a hyperinflation, I tend to fall in the slow melt up camp.
Mm.
That's kind of the nothing stops this train camp, which is
Yeah.
that um, large monetized fiscal deficits are generally going to keep continuing. They're very, very hard to reduce at this stage because it's kind of recursive.
Mhm.
Um, I generally don't see hyperinflation in any sort of near term uh, sense because we're not even at like emerging market stage yet. We're kind of like dabbling in how a lot of emerging markets function in terms of finances,
Mm.
and most of those are not in hyperinflation. There's $13 trillion worth of global dollar-denominated debt that different entities have, and that all of that is in flexible demand for dollars. So this is like a Gordian knot. Like this is a really kind of like entrenched network effect, and
Mhm.
it's very, very hard to hyperinflate the dollar. Maybe in the long arc of time.
Right.
So I'm not talking things like if you look at 20 years or so, I don't really have an opinion. We'll get closer to that. But when I look at an investable time horizon or kind of a political time horizon of say 5 or 10 years,
Mhm.
I don't really see something like hyperinflation on the table, but I do see something like emerging marketification of U.S. finances, that we enter a phase where we're structurally running these bigger monetized deficits, and then the key risk there is that if you're on the wrong side of those deficits, you're kind of getting siphoned away, and if you're on the right side of the deficits, you're doing pretty good, and then that's how you can build up more and more populism more and more frustration that people have, and they know something's wrong, but they're not quite sure, what the nuance of that problem is, and that's kind of the thing that I get concerned about.
Bitcoin has smashed past the $93,000 mark, fueled by what some analysts are calling a Trump pump after President-elect Trump announced plans to relax cryptocurrency regulations. This surge, which doubles the year's low of $38,505, reflects a renewed optimism among traders betting on a pro-crypto administration. Trump's vision to establish the U.S. as a crypto capital and build a national Bitcoin reserve has sent shockwaves through the market, with some expecting a profound transformation in the regulatory landscape. As Lyn Alden rightly mentioned, these developments offer insight into how Trump's policies might reshape the crypto market and global finance. She believes that the easing of regulations could spark an influx of capital into crypto as investors seek alternatives to traditional finance, which is struggling under large fiscal deficits and increased regulatory oversight. Alden suggests that the friction between legacy financial systems and digital currencies like Bitcoin reveals structural vulnerabilities in traditional finance, especially as more investors turn to decentralized assets in search of stability. Trump's plans to remove SEC Chair Gary Gensler have stirred optimism among crypto supporters, many of whom view Gensler's tenure as overly restrictive. Alden points out that the potential regulatory shift aligns with growing momentum in crypto ETFs, which have recently seen record inflows, with Citigroup reporting a $1.38 billion boost on November 7th. This increase in institutional interest, along with Trump's proposed deregulation, has also lifted other digital assets, with Ethereum topping $3,200 and Dogecoin hitting a 3-year high. Alden notes, however, that this potential growth comes with risks. She warns that unchecked fiscal deficits could push the U.S. economy toward emerging marketification, where economic instability could threaten financial health over time. Yet she also acknowledges that a favorable regulatory approach could strengthen crypto adoption, as more institutions embrace decentralized finance. The next few years, she believes, could be transformative, setting the stage for Bitcoin's mainstream adoption and a reshaped global financial system. With Bitcoin's price shooting up, what do you think is driving the surge? Is it the push for more privacy and decentralization? Or is it all about winning over regulators to keep the momentum going? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, share this video, and hit your thumbs on the like button. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.